Hey you, it's Shelby here, and today I want to cover something a little bit different than usual. Today I want to give you a peek inside something I have never shared before, and that is Procreate. I have been using Procreate for many years now, and going from traditional art to digital art with this software definitely had a steep learning curve. Honestly, I have been nervous about trying to teach Procreate stuff for a while now, but today I am giving it a shot by showing you a step-by-step tutorial of how I create my monthly calendar printables. For years I made these printables with Photoshop on my Wacom, but about a year ago I started consistently doing it on my iPad with Procreate, and I have really enjoyed using this software to create these freebies. Finally, after many years of people asking for this particular tutorial, I am going to show you the step-by-step process from beginning to end so that you can create printables for yourself to use, or even create printables for your blog or small business. FYI, this tutorial is assuming that you already kind of have the basic groundwork in Procreate, that you already kind of know where things are and how the basic tools work. So if you're a complete beginner with Procreate, this is probably not the tutorial for you. I'm using a 12.9-inch 5th gen iPad with I think it's the 2nd generation Apple Pencil, and the software is of course Procreate version 5.2. You can find all the links for everything that I'm using down in the description if you want to check any of those out. But without further ado, let's get started. First things first, of course, you have to open up Procreate and open a new document. So here's where I keep all of my old calendars that I've been creating. And when you're opening up your canvas, think about what you want the final printable to be. I'm assuming that you are like me and you want to have them be standard copy paper size, which is 8.5 by 11. So for that, you would just need to create a new document, switch this to inches, and then have the width be 8.5, height 11 inches. And then I keep everything else the same. DPI is 300, maximum layers is 120. I've never used all of the layers, so that's not a concern for me, so I just keep it the way it is. And then boom, you've got your first step done. Now the next thing I like to do is think about the margins, because with printers, there's usually some kind of a margin. And this is something that is, again, kind of up to you, but I like to leave a 1/2 inch white margin around every edge so that it's just safe, so nothing gets cut off. I like to be sure that everything that I design is going to end up in the final printable, no matter what kind of printer people are using. Now, this can be a little bit tricky in Procreate because, as far as I know, Procreate doesn't have any type of ruler that Photoshop does have. So that's one notch for Photoshop there. But there is a way that you can kind of sort of replicate having a ruler, and that is with the canvas guides. So you can find that by clicking the wrench up here, going to Canvas, and then hit Drawing Guide, and then edit the drawing guide. I find that if you go to grid size and you type in 300, that should give you about the right, kind of a guide that is about 8 inches by 11 inches, or 8.5 by 11. And you can sort of adjust this a little bit so that you can square up the edge of your grid with the top left corner of your piece of paper. It's up to you. And you can always change the color of the grid if you want to be fun. So I'm going to go ahead and make this really thick and easy for you to see. I can see it fine, but the camera doesn't always see what I see. So now, if you count it out, it is approximately 8.5 boxes wide and 11 boxes tall. So that is the basic stuff that we need. That is the basic structure. Something else you can do is, if you've already created printables in the past and you don't want to have to use the grid and kind of guess a little bit every single time, use your previous printables as your base guide. This is what I do since I have a whole bunch of old printables to use, but if you don't have that, then I'm showing you how to do it from scratch. So really quick, let me show you. I have my previous printable, my April 2022 printable right here. I have it saved as a flat image, and I am going to go ahead and save this as just a JPEG on my iPad. Save image, boom. I'm gonna hop back over to our current canvas and import. Go to add, insert photo, click that, and then you just fill the canvas with the same size image that you have, and boom, you have yourself a guide. So you can use this by just going to the layer adjustments and making the opacity really, really light, and then move on to the next step, with this as a basic guide. But I'm going to go ahead and delete this and just do it from scratch so you can see what it looks like from the beginning. The next thing that you want to do is fill in the base layer with color, and that is going to be like taking into account the margins and everything. So I'm going to grab the lasso tool, and I'm aiming for about halfway through the boxes because the boxes are about 1 inch and I want the margins to be about 1/2 inch. So I'm trying to split the boxes in two. And I'm doing this with the color fill option selected. If you make a mistake, you don't need to keep trying from scratch. Just hit the selection tool and then you can adjust, hit freeform, and you can adjust the box to be, the size that you are trying to get it to be. I am satisfied with that. My margins are in place, my base layer is set. Now we can move on to the next step. Now, before I move on with anything else, I like to figure out what my color palette is going to be because that's going to very much affect kind of the decisions that I make moving forward. And it's nice to have some pretty colors while you are working on all of these layers. Of course, you can just go and pick a bunch of things using the color picker here, create a palette that you like, that is totally fine. But I also like to use images from the web of photos that I like or color palettes that I like and simply import them into Procreate like this. So I already have some photos saved with colors palettes that I really like. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab this lovely color palette right here, go to palettes and drop it in. And there you go. It will auto fill a palette with all of the colors from that photograph. Of course, you can also just import a photo, pop it in right here, and then use the color picker. And then once I've got my color palette figured out, if it's on a layer, I will hide the layer and kind of tuck it down below because I don't really need it anymore, but it's nice to have it around to reference. Now I'm going to build the base structure of the printable, which means the calendar box mainly and just any other large pieces that I want to place on this printable. So on the layer above the base layer, because the base layer should always be below everything else just about every single time, I'm going to create a new layer. And once again, I'm going to grab the lasso tool and I am going to create a box. I'm going to select it, get it nice and centered, and then place it somewhere. Ooh, that makes sense for me. And then above that layer, I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to pick a different color really quick just so I can easily see what I am doing. I can change all of these colors later. Don't worry about the colors right now. That is not your focus. We will adjust it all in later stages. So now I'm going to once again use the rectangle color fill tool to just get a basic weekday headers section figured out and then the calendar part figured out. Awesome. Now we can move on to the next step. And before you get too carried away, it's always a good idea to go and name your layers because the more layers you add, the more complicated it gets. And trust me, it can get wild. So, just go in here and just name a few things so that you know what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and group these two because they're just sort of base structure. And that's going to be the calendar and then the header and calendar box. All of these are going to be structure. And now we are going to figure out the calendar numbers because that is one of the most important parts of this whole thing. So I like to kind of get it figured out early because that shouldn't change a whole lot. Even if I start messing around with other flavors and styles and stuff, the calendar numbers will be the calendar numbers. So I am making this for May of 2022. The first day of the month is on a Sunday, which means it's going to be a really nice, clean box. And we're gonna have a Friday the 13th this May, which is neat. Okay, go into the brushes, and I'm gonna go and grab a thin brush. I like to do a monoline brush. I have one that I got from a Tila Every Tuesday brush set. Actually, I think this one might have been a free brush, so you might want to check out Tila Every Tuesday. She's fantastic. And, or otherwise you can just go to the calligraphy and use the monoline brush that's in there. I just prefer Tila's version because I want to use it to make sure that I have all of my weekdays and the numbers on the calendar grid all figured out and even and all that good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and make it smaller. So the size of your grid is going to be a little subjective depending on how big you've made your calendar boxes and rectangles and all of that. But I have at about 176, that's given me about the right size so that I have 7 boxes across. So we're going to go ahead and roll with that, 176. And then from here, I'm just going to start hand writing my numbers. I like to hand write them. You can absolutely add text through the Procreate feature and do the text version of this. I just find that writing it by hand is quicker, and I like the way it looks. I like the hand-drawn look, so that's what I go for. You do what is best for you. I have my monoline brush at about an 8%, and from there, I am just aiming for sort of the center of the box. I realized that all of my ones were on the teams were different from the style of one that I did over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and erase this one and make it a little bit more simple so that it matches the style of all of the other numbers. You want to keep an eye out for consistency because those little details matter whenever you have the full thing done. It really looks much better if you have a consistent style all the way throughout. And at this point, you can use your lasso tool to adjust it to freehand, unselect color fill, but you can use it to kind of readjust any numbers, make sure that they're centered in their boxes. And don't worry that, like, obviously this yellow box is a little too short. We can adjust that here in just a second. Just fill out the grid as you go, and you can adjust other things to fit it better later. And don't worry about it being perfect because we're doing this, by hand. We're trying to draw it by hand. I like the hand-drawn look, which means it's going to have little imperfections. It's not going to be exactly right in every single way. That kind of adds to the charm. So don't worry about making everything look just right. I'm going to go ahead and hop over here into the structure and select this rectangle here and just make it a little bit longer to accommodate. Perfect. Personally, I've been really liking just the numbers lately, but obviously a lot of calendars have a grid, like they have the drawn boxes around all of the numbers so that the numbers fit neatly into a drawn grid. You can totally do that if you want. That's, again, up to you, dealer's choice. It depends on your style and what you prefer. I like it a little bit more clean and simple like this, which is why I'm opting to do this. At this point, it's time to start adding some of the real flair and texture and flavor that's going to make this a really interesting printable. So the yellow and teal boxes that you see right now, those are not permanent. Those are more of just like a visual guide so I can know where I'm at, make sure I'm spacing everything correctly. But now it's time to create the actual boxes that the numbers are going to be resting on. So to do that, I am going to hop over into my brushes and I'm going to grab a textured dry brush from the Slayout Grid brush pack. It's from a product that I bought a while ago. So it's not a free brush, but you can just use whatever textured brush you really like. Play around, see what brushes there are that you enjoy. But I'm going to be using this parched brush here. And I'm going to hide this one. And I'm going to lower the opacity of this other teal box so that I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. I'm creating a fresh layer, and I'm going to put this below the numbers layer. That's very important, or you're not going to be able to see your numbers. And then I'm going to pick a color. So as you can see, this brush is very textured, but it still has a really nice solid fill so that you can see the colors, you can see the numbers on top of it, but there's still a lovely textured edge to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of roughly draw a box. I'm going to entirely hide the structures layer because I don't think we really need it. Now I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to put this above the base layer, the calendar base layer. I'm going to hop into my recents and use the same brush that I used for the numbers and switch it back to another dark color. And now I'm going to just hand letter the weekday headers. Once again, you can use text for this, you can type it out and everything. I like the hand-drawn look. I do sometimes bounce around on this one depending on the flavor of printable, where I will sometimes use fonts and I'll sometimes hand letter them. But we're gonna stick with this for now and move on to the next step. I'm gonna go ahead and group these three together, the numbers, the weekdays, and the calendar base. I'm gonna have this just be calendar box. So we can still go back and add more style and a little bit more oomph to this later, but again, we're kind of sticking with the more basic stuff, and then we're going to add more as we go. And you know, we don't want to overcomplicate it and focus on the details too soon. You want to get the general shape of everything and then start really adding all those fun details that make a printable pop. So now that those are all grouped together and tucked away safely, I'm going to add a new layer. And this is the stage where I kind of like to mess around with like what I want the style to be, because I don't always go in with a strong idea of what I want a printable to be. Sometimes I just kind of start and let it develop as we go, and that's kind of what I'm going to do here. So I'm opening up a layer where, you know, I can just sketch and mess around and see what kind of stuff that I like. And then once I have kind of conceptualized it, that's just going to be a sketch layer that we can tuck away at the end. This isn't any kind of a final layer. I think that's the aesthetic that I want to go for here. So I'm just going to kind of have there be a bunch of magnolia branches peeking in and overlapping and just having some flowers. It's going to be, I think it's going to be pretty. So I'm going to stick with some line art with this one, but I'll show you how to add a little bit of texture and a little bit of some of my favorite tools and uses later once we've kind of built this. So now that I've decided the sort of concept of the design, it's time to move on to really bringing it together and bringing it to life. I'm going to hide this layer and create a brand new layer on top of everything. I am going to create some text. So I'm going to go to the wrench, then add, and then add text. I'm going to double tap that, hop in here. There we go. I think I'm going to do this. This is HT Modern for the curious. I purchased this font because I like it. So I've typed it out. Now I'm going to go ahead and make sure that it is centered. And then I'm going to create a new layer and put that just below the text layer that I just created. I'm going to grab my 6B pencil, which I have right here. I'm going to grab a color. And now I'm going to go to the text layer and I'm going to duplicate it. And the one below, I'm going to make that red color, and I'm going to bring it down a little bit right there. I'm going to bring that fresh empty layer that I just created between the two text layers, and then just changing my mind, I'm going to switch back to the mono weight brush, something nice and smooth. I'm going to bring it down real small, and we are going to connect the shadow May to the forefront May. Okay, I'm satisfied with that header for now. Sometimes I might choose to add the year if I'm feeling froggy. This time, I think it looks really good with just May, so I'm going to leave it as it is. And again, I'm going to go and add more texture and fun stuff in a bit, kind of in the final stages. But I want to next focus on main design of the magnolia trees in the background. But first, I think it's time to adjust some of these colors, because now that I have a firmer idea of what the design is going to be, I think that these colors need to change. I'm going to group the May stuff so that it's all in one nice little nestled group. I'm going to delete the structure because I don't need that anymore. That was just to kind of get me started. But now for the base, I'm going to go to, select it, select Alpha Lock, and then I'm going to go and grab a big round brush, and I can change the color this way. And from here, with the Alpha Lock on, I can kind of mess around with all these different colors and see if any of them really strike me as the one. And I think this one is right. I like that blue. Okay, I'm going to unselect the Alpha Lock, and I'm going to hop over to the calendar box. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to Alpha Lock the calendar base, and I'm going to grab, let's see, that pink seems really nice. Yeah, pink and blue. White is always an option. There, that's nice and clear. Now that I'm looking at it, I think the weekdays maybe do need to be typed so that they match the same font as the header. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the wrench. I'm going to hit add text, open up the keyboard. Come on. And we're going to do Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Select all of that. I'm going to hop in here, and I'm going to make them all capitalized by hitting this right there. I'm going to make their size a little bit smaller. And then to adjust the spacing between them, you go to kerning. And you can use that as a method. So actually, I'm going to hop on here and put the grid back on, the regular grid, not the symmetry grid that I was playing with, because this will tell me exactly what each column is, so I can sort of fit the kerning to properly fit those boxes so that the weekday headers can be centered over the columns of numbers. Sometimes you can't quite get them to work just the way that you want, so you can just get them the size that you want and then use the lasso tool and the selection tool to push them around and get them where you want them to be. At this point, I am going to once again duplicate the text layer so that I can create a shadow. I don't want it to be quite as extreme, so I don't have to draw all of the things, so I'm just going to have it be just a little bit of a shadow, just a baby shadow. Alright, so I've messed around with some colors, I've adjusted a few things, but I think we've got a really solid base now. We have our calendar, we have the numbers, we have the headers, all of that stuff is now in place. So now it is truly time to begin adding all of those gorgeous drawn elements. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go ahead and collapse a lot of these boxes here, and I am going to add a layer just above the base layer. So not above the text, not above the boxes, none of that stuff, because I want this design to sit behind all of that. So I'm going to create a layer there. I am going to select white, and I am going to select this empty layer that I've just created, and I'm going to make it a clipping mask right over the base layer, which means that whenever I draw over it, it only draws on this colored base layer, not into the margins, which is very, very useful. I am in the inking tab of brushes that came naturally on Procreate. I'm going to grab Tinderbox, and I'm going to create my trees out of that because I like the texture of it. Alright, so on one layer I have created all of the branches and twigs and stuff with a white brush, and now I am going to create a new layer on top of that one, and this is going to be the flowers. Maybe the dark blue. The teal. There we go. We'll stick with that for now. We'll see how it goes. Alright, so on the flowers layer, I'm going to go ahead and start creating a bunch of flowers. And I'm not worrying too much about the details of each one of these flowers because in the end, you know, there's going to be a pattern of them, so little deficiencies, little imperfections are going to easily be hidden. Alright, so I have created one layer of a bunch of flowers, but I want to go ahead and add one more layer for a little bit more depth. So I'm going to create a brand new layer. I'm going to put it below that one, and it automatically turns it into a clipping mask, so I don't need to worry about doing that. And I'm going to make this a darker color, that lovely red color. And this is going to sit, actually, I'm going to put it below the branches, so that way it's like these are in the background, these are behind some branches. It's a little bit more, you know, a little bit more realistic than everything being in the forefront. Now we have some really lovely line work for all of these magnolias to give a little bit more distinction because we want readability to be clear. So I'm going to add another layer here, and I'm going to add white with my tinderbox brush, and I'm going to create an outline layer. Okay, so I'm going to hop over into dark flower. I'm going to get my eraser and I'm going to get it real small. And we're going to zoom in and see where dark flowers are peeking through into the light flowers. Right here. Okay, I think that's all of them. And now I'm going to do the same thing with branches. And I'm going to erase any of the branches that are kind of snaking through in the background of the flowers, of the light flowers. These are free. I need to, make sure to get them to a point where I'm happy with them. And this is something I am quite happy with design-wise. So now we just need to figure out any final color choices and then add texture, which is one of my favorite steps. So you can do this with whatever brushes you like, whatever texture brushes you like. I'm once again going to the Slay Out brushes pack that I have, which has these absolutely stunning different textures going on. So I'm going to go over here, and I want to make a clipping mask on some of these flowers and stuff and branches. So what I'm actually going to do is I am going to undo the clipping masks on all of these because that's going to be a bit of a pain. You don't have to do this. If you like it just the way it is, leave it the way it is. But I'm going to create a rectangle right here with all of the different, getting all of the flowers and stuff. And I'm going to hit invert, grab my eraser, and just come through and erase anything on the margins on all three. And that should ensure that there's nothing else going on. That's not necessary if you are, if you're just going to keep the designs the way that they are, but I want to add some flavor to the branches. So I'm going to do that by adding a layer above it, and I'm going to make it a clipping mask. And you can't make a clipping mask on a clipping mask, so that's why I had to do that whole thing. I'm going to grab my sprayer, salted sprayer, and I'm going to grab, let's try this. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. It's not exactly a shadow, I'm not being that meticulous with it, but I am just kind of like throwing them in there so that we can see, you know, there's a little bit of like texture on the branches, which I rather like. And if it's a little too intense for you, all you have to do is hop into this layer and just turn the opacity down so that there's, you know, the hint of a texture, but it's not quite as big and colorful as you had it originally. So I think I'm happy with that. And now I'm going to go ahead and group up all of these flowers. All right, and I'm going to hop into the calendar box here, and I am going to create a clipping mask over the calendar box, same as before. I'm going to grab, let's say some pink maybe. What will look good? Okay, I'm going to make this sprayer a little bit bigger. And I'm going to create just kind of a texture along the edge here. Nothing super overwhelming, because you still want to see the numbers, you want them to be very clear, but enough that it is really adding a lot of oomph. And just like before, I'm going to go ahead and turn the opacity down on this just a smidge, just so that it's there, but it's not quite as intense. And I'm going to do the same thing with weekdays. I'm going to try making a clipping mask of those, see what we can do with that. I'm going to zoom way in. I'm going to bring my brush a little bit smaller. I think I'm happy with this. So there's one final touch that I always add, or I always try to add, sometimes I forget, is my website. So that way, if someone kind of comes across this printable out of context, if someone steals it, my information is in the actual document. So that way, it's a little bit harder for people to steal. And to do this, I'm going to go to add text, bring that down here. And I'm just going to go ahead and type in my website, littlecoffeefox.com. And now I will mess with the size to make it real small. And I'm also going to mess with the font, because I don't want it to be that big flashy font. I want it to be a little bit more thin. So I'm going to switch to Kiona, which is my kind of go-to, semi-bold. And then I'm going to put it in the calendar box. I like it to be in the calendar box, so that way it's not really feasible for someone to crop it out, should they choose to, or try to. I'm going to make it real small, 10 points, that ought to do it. Make the kerning just a little bit bigger so it's easier to read. I'm going to shimmy this right, oh, let's say dead center actually. And I'm going to make it white so that it stands out. All right, I think at this point I can call this printable done. As you can see, there's a lot of finagling, there's a lot of trying things on for size and then making adjustments and undoing it and starting again. And that's all just part of the process, because, you know, sometimes you don't start with a really strong idea of what you want and you kind of figure it out along the way. And that's just the beauty of this whole entire thing. So I hope I covered everything okay. I hope that was easy to follow and easy to understand, or at the very least, interesting. Now that it is completely done, I go to the wrench, I go to share, and I like to share this as a PDF. I will select best because I can always, you know, squish it a little bit on my computer, but I want to start off with the strongest file, and then I'm just going to save it to my drive. I can name it here as long as I keep the PDF. That's very important. If you don't save it with the .pdf or the .png or the .jpeg or whatever it is, then it will not save as a file that you can do anything with. I've learned this the hard way. So now I just go and pop it into my folder where I want it to be. There you go. I hope you enjoyed that little peek into my design process and you found it interesting or maybe even helpful. So I'm curious to know if you prefer calendar boxes like the grid boxes or just the naked numbers like what I did. I'm really curious because there seems to be a really big divide on this one. So let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it, subscribe, you know the whole thing. I'm just trying to appease the algorithm here, so just interact with it in some way. I appreciate any little bit that you can give. And don't forget to go find me on social media to see more artsy stuff, tutorials, helpful information, any and all of the above. Oh, and if you want the printable that you watched me design for yourself for the month of May, then all you have to do is hop into my description and sign up for the Foxden Resource Library. It's completely free, and you'll get access to this and tons of other freebies and printables and all that good stuff. With that, I say farewell.